The Communist Party of China has long kept a tight control on both its traditional and new media to avoid potential subversion of its authority. Censoring and controlling information, spreading deceptive narratives still remain as its tactics to exert that control. Yes, a stronger control even in the times of COVID-19 pandemic. However, Tenzin Dalha, a researcher at Tibet Policy Institute, wrote in his recent article that the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed a chink or a gap in the China's cyber-suppression armor. Let's talk more about it with Tenzin Dalha himself in this episode of COVID-19 Special.
Hello. Allow me to thank Tibettv for covering these rights. And to begin with Chinese cybersecurity as well as the recent pandemic caused by the COVID-19, China has one of the most rigid, dynamic, and sophisticated censorship, and recently the propaganda network of Chinese has been vastly and extensively covered. With this regard, they try to make their own narratives and cover blanket for the cause and the details of informations which were censored, and it has made lots of tensions, and outspoken netizens who came in Chinese social media platforms, and they predominantly discuss about how this virus were separated in Wuhan market, and these informations were mainly based by first-hand from the Chinese netizens and citizens who are outspoken. And with regard to these goals, China always try to cover their own deceptive narratives, and they most probably cover up the issues. This made a concern to worldwide, and the initial outbreak covering has predominantly makes suppression of freedom of expression.
Right, so talking about the freedom of speech that Chinese government is violating, the Communist Party of China has long been violating its citizens' right to information, freedom of speech, and freedom of press by cracking down on news stories claiming that they endanger the country by exposing the so-called state secrets. How and in what way did the COVID-19 pandemic expose the gap in China's cyber-suppression armor?
During the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a very big gap between the Chinese cyber armors, because many of the netizens were already suppressed, and they want to vent their grievance against the CCP regime. And they are also, from the other side, China tried to paint a positive image to themselves, and they recruit lots of cyber propagandists. And these propagandists are popularly known as 50 Cent Army, and many of them are working in a department as well as news outlet and media outlet and private entities. They came on social media platforms with fake accounts, and as well as Chinese foreign diplomats, they created new Twitter accounts, and starting from April, more than 20,000 new Twitter accounts were created, and 200 diplomats and media outlets there has made new Twitter accounts, and they shed more positive light about how China challenges the COVID-19 pandemic and how they sort out their problems inside as well as outside the borders.
You have pointed out an astounding fact that was recently all over the news, that Twitter has shut down about 170,000 accounts that tweeted about Chinese government's narratives, and the Twitter also said that those tweets were mostly or predominantly made in Chinese languages. So could you elaborate more on how Chinese governments are employing these huge surveillance technology and propaganda tactics, apart from, such as the 50 Cent Army that you just mentioned about, apart from using or employing its own state-controlled media such as Xinhua and Global Times?
Ironically, Twitter was banned in China since from 2009, but more recently, the Twitter official has announced that more Twitter fake accounts were created by Chinese, and they are using in Mandarin and English to make more false propaganda on social media platforms. And from that itself, Chinese diplomats, including Chinese Foreign Minister spokesperson Li Zhenzhao himself, created a narrative and came up with many conspiracy theories about the origin of the virus from the United States militaries who came in Wuhan. And also they accused European and other nations for bringing such virus to China, but they are trying to cover up the reality behind and bringing lots of new narrative and conspiracy theory to make the spread of false information and mismanagement of all these matters to themselves.
You have argued that despite the government's tight control over the internet and information, the COVID-19 outbreak saw an expression of online criticism from Chinese netizens and human rights advocates at a level that was never seen before, right? So what does that imply?
Most of the global social media networks were banned in China. Instead of that, they have their own homegrown social media platforms like Weibo and WeChat. So with recent COVID-19 pandemic cases starting from March, there are lots of messages were floated in Chinese social media platforms showing their outrage and outcry for asking the government for transparency and accountability of the details of this origin of the virus. Because at the initial period, CCP and the health workers, they claim that the virus is preventable and there won't be a further cause and damage. But in reality, it become a worldwide concern now, and this has greatly made everyone more engaged to debate about the origin and the effects among the Chinese netizens. So they came forward, as well as while using the virtual private network VPN, which was banned in China. So they tried to engage more in Instagram as well as in Facebook, and they came forward and they narrate their own stories. There are many youngsters especially who have idea to share the first-hand information from Wuhan itself. So these wise get some special attention from the global platforms, and they were widely covered. And as a result, Chinese government become quite ashamed of the covering the details of these informations. For example, the whistleblower Dr. Li, who first initially in January raised a voice about the virus, but he was interrogated and later died due to this virus. And these incidents has made outrage among the public.
So one last question before I let you go, Dalha. According to your research, how would you rate the Communist Party of China's level of success in employing these strategies such as mask diplomacy, developing various theories about the origin of the novel coronavirus, and influencing the World Health Organization?
As far as concerned to my observation, I think these all are kind of a failed attempt by Chinese government, starting from the mass diplomacy and the increase and pay rate of 50-cent army to 70 cents. They tried to make lots of propaganda, and even they tried to compare with US. And for the European countries, due to the mass diplomacy, they tried to aid masks as well as sanitizers delivery from China, and comparing US for not helping them when they need. But in reality, China, they want to make and claim themselves a hero during the pandemic, but many of the ads were poor in quality and substandard quality. So this has raised question among the European as well as in other part of the world about the Chinese transparency and their legitimacy behind working exactly on the issues and covering the things and making themselves as a front line during this pandemic. They are very smart enough to divert the attention of the people, and they try to engage with the different issues around the world. For example, recently they did on border issues, as well as they also did on South China's Sea. They are trying to stretch their hand wherever there is some little conflicts to divert the attention of the virus origins and the details of the pandemic. In China, those Chinese netizens and Chinese nationals, they always try to manage to slip through the cracks, and they portray serious topic into light-hearted manner, and they try to portray the case of COVID-19 into memes and images. The more you suppress the people, the greater they will be resistant. Thank you.
Tenzin, Dalha, thank you so much for joining with us. As always, this conversation was very informative and educational one.
Thank you so much, Mila, having me here. Thank you.
So that was Tenzin Dalha, a researcher at Tibet Policy Institute, on his recent article, COVID-19 Exposed, a Chink in China's Cyber-Suppression Armour. Thank you for watching COVID-19 Special.